Luchotan. Luchotan. That's his office building. He comes by helicopter. I missed my 6th birthday because we crossed the international date line and we lose one day. That was my 6th birthday. It's very interesting that I went to university in California, and afterwards I had to serve 2 years in the U.S. Army. So 1955, I was sent to Korea for 18 months, GI. 10 years after the fighting and liberation of Manila, I was a soldier this time in Korea, north of Seoul, near 38th parallel. And I spent 1.5 years there and visited Japan several times, which I always enjoyed. Japan is a beautiful country. The people are quite amazing. Not unlike, completely different from the military class that misguided the country. There is a love of beauty and nature and things which is probably unique in Asia that occurs, and poetry, etc., that happens in Japan. And I have enjoyed many wonderful trips to Japan and have some good Japanese friends. But that is a different side from the soldiers. I know this list that is being translated now, written in kanji by uneducated soldiers, very difficult to translate. They were raised a different way to follow. They were told to follow the teachings of the emperor. It was really the teachings of the politicians. And the politicians had an agenda, when you look back now, against the best interests of Japan. So that's a chapter in the past, and I don't think that, I hope I will not see it in my lifetime again. I often wonder why my brother and I were put on the list to be released with the servants. And I think sometimes maybe it could have been the officer in charge of making the lists had children our age and had compassion and put us on the list to release. I don't know. But I go there to the Masonic Temple each year. There is a memorial plaque outside that says 200 people were massacred there. My father and my uncle, 1 month after liberation, went to visit the Masonic Temple. At that time, they said many dead people had been dead for more than 1 month. Not possible to enter, because in the tropical climate, to leave a body for 1 month, not possible. So until today, we do not know what happened to the members of my family. My mother, my grandmother, my uncle, my aunt. My uncle, particularly interesting story because he was in the death march. So he survived the death march. He survived 2 years of the military prison, and he came back and he was arrested and executed with my family. So those were different days, and there is a saying, if you forget your history, you must repeat it. So it's interesting over here with Memorare that we must remember our history so that it will not be repeated. And it's very interesting. I went to the Ateneo libraries, the Women's Studies Library. They have the personal papers of Rosa Henson, who was the first comfort woman to talk about her experience here. There was a letter by a Japanese committee saying the government gives us money to pay our expenses, but we are not allowed to give 1 yen to the women, only for our expenses. And I saw there a Japanese translation of her book. I think it should be published. This is an experience. In my collection at Filipinas Heritage, there is an important book on comfort women written by Japanese professors. That should be put online, because if the politicians say there's no comfort women, these are Japanese professors who have written the story. You can say the Koreans know this, but it's very difficult to say it's not true if they are the Japanese professors writing the story.
Before Japanese come, maybe the American time, right?
Yeah.
America kind of occupied the Philippine time. At the time when you were born in the Philippines.
Yes.
So from now, when you see that period, what kind of the period for you?
Before the war.
Before the war.
I was 9 years old when the war began. And I remember that day because our school finished at 12:30. My mother arrived at 11 o'clock, and the car was full of cans of food. Because when my father heard about the war, he said, go to the grocery and buy all the cans of food you can find. So she bought, and we kept during the war, all the cans of food. My grandmother had 2 Japanese gardeners before the war. Everybody doubted what was going to happen when the Japanese entered Manila. Nothing happened. Our Chinese ama was scared. All the Chinese were scared it would be maybe Nanjing massacre. So she used to dress before Chinese style. She changed and she dressed like a Filipina, so they do not think that she's Chinese. About 2 or 3 months after the Japanese entered, the 2 gardeners that my grandmother had before the war came to visit her. They were dressed as civilians with coat and tie, all now working for Japanese Army. And they came and they brought sweet candies for the children. We said politely, thank you very much, thank you very much. And then when they went away, we threw them away because we thought maybe they're poison. But in front of them, we were very polite. After the war, somebody told me we have a Japanese soldier buried in our garden. So my brother had a biology project. He and his friend had a biology project. So for the biology project, they dug up the body and they put the wires as if it's a skeleton for the school. It was very, what's the word? It's many, many bones in the feet. But he was wearing the Japanese, it's rubber in the bottom and canvas in the top. The canvas was rotted by the climate, but all the bones of the toes were in the rubber part, so easily to put them together. And that was their biology project in school. After the war, when we returned to our house, we would have terrible smells. I would say 2 months after liberation, when we returned to our house in Malate, terrible smells. And my brother and I would go and look, always a dead body. So we would call and they would come and take a dead body. You just follow your nose, you can smell the dead bodies. And there was, I think, 4 or 5 dead people that were recovered in our area. The house burned down or something happened, they were there, they were trapped. And I think that many people discovered dead bodies everywhere in Manila. What?
Before the Japanese military
Came.
maybe that's kind of the very kind of good time for you, for the children. No.
And before the war, everything was wonderful. We went to school, we went to the polo club, and it was a very happy childhood. Every afternoon we went to walk on the boulevard. Now Rojas Boulevard in that day is called Dewey Boulevard. And we would go there and walk and play. And my grandfather, it's 1 kilometer, my grandfather would walk every afternoon for his exercise. And when we see him, we run and stop and ask him to buy us ice cream. He always buys us ice cream. Even during the war, we used to go and play in the boulevard also. Until the end. Then the Japanese military said no more people on the boulevard because they cut down the trees and they used it as a runway for the airplanes. And it became a military base. They could not have people walking around. All the houses facing the boulevard were expropriated. The military said, come and take it. The house next to us, which is a large 2-story house, was taken as the headquarters. And when the fighting started, they left. And one night I was sleeping in bed, I think beginning of February. I woke up, I was not in the bed, I was on the floor. Big explosion completely destroyed the house next door, and inside my eyelids full of dust because they left explosives in the building and the building was completely destroyed, and the shock pushed me onto the floor. So when the war started, my grandmother started planting a vegetable garden. We had maybe 100 banana trees. We grew eggplant and sweet potato and onions, tomato, everything for the house. We also had 40 chickens. And the chickens, when they lay the egg, they have to go into a nest and the door closes. And when they go, when they made a lick, we take it, we see the number we put. The chickens with no eggs, that's the ones we eat. So they better lay eggs if they want to live. And we had 2 pigs, and when one was killed, then we bought another small one to feed. Everybody was doing this for food during the war. At one point, there was a letter I saw in my father's files. My mother wrote to him in prison to say, do you remember that gold brooch you bought for me in Paris? I sold it for a 2-kilo can of dried milk for the children. It's the gold brooch from Paris. She sold it so we could have milk. So and we were lucky because my grandmother had her account in a Filipino bank. They were open. So we could take money from her. My father was using the British banks. British banks, American banks, your money is frozen. You cannot touch your money. That was another aspect of the war. That people forget about it. You might be very rich in your country, but if you're here without a job and without money, you're poor. You hope your friends will take care of you, but they have their problems also. In some cases, people in Santo Tomas who had very good friends outside, the very good friends would take the children for maybe 6 months and then send them back to Santo. But many families did not have anybody to send the children to. Half my class when I graduated from high school after the war were my classmates before the war. They were still here. And the other half were the children of the American military. So when the Americans came after the war, they brought the wives and family also. So the school was half people from Manila and half people with the military.
I want to know
Yeah.
The war started 1941
Yes.
after the Pearl Harbor attack, right?
Yeah.
Now, how did you know war is starting?
For me, when my mother took us out of school early, at 9 years old, I went to school that morning. Pearl Harbor was September 7, Sunday in Pearl Harbor. It was Monday here,
Okay.
probably 2 o'clock in the morning on Monday. And when the people woke up and they heard the news. So we went to school like normal on Monday morning. And after that, school stopped. We went home, and a few days later, we moved into my grandparents' home. And in my grandparents' home, 4 or 5 people every bedroom, because she had friends whose house was taken by the Japanese military. They have no place to stay. They come and stay with us. So there were several people that were coming and staying with us when they came.
When you noticed that the war is starting,
Yeah.
how did you feel? Because you were children, right?
Yeah.
What happened? What do you feel? Do you scared about it?
To be truthful, we were too stupid to be scared. You know, for us, life was normal, and we played. We had to be quiet at house because my grandfather was very, very sick. Like I said, he died the day the Japanese entered Manila. So we had to be quiet when we were playing around in the house, in the gardens. But there were quite a few Japanese in the Philippines before the war. There was a big colony of Japanese in Davao, I think. I recently read the book, the English translation of a book by a Japanese successful businessman. And he's talking about how he helped some prominent Filipinos to be released by the Kempeitai. They arrested them, and he said, no, this man is a good man. So he was helping them, his friends, to be released, because of course an army comes in, they don't know who the good are, they don't know who the bad are, and he was helping to get his friends released by the army. The first 3 years of the war, almost normal for children. We went a different school, we went to school, we came back, we had our homework, and it was more or less normal, except my father was not at home. And I remember one day coming home from school, where I'd been in a fight with another boy. I came home and my father was there having lunch because he had a pass from Santo Tomas. He had a pass from Santo Tomas to come home for, I think, 3 days. And so that was a big surprise to find him at home. But none of them, my uncle, all the men we knew, no work. They had nothing to do. They had no office to go to. So they stayed at home. When my uncle was released from the prison camp, once a week he organized a poker. His friends, 5 or 6 friends, came to play poker once a week at home. And that, not much to do. It's very difficult. If you don't do that, some people went and go and joined the guerrilla.